Stage.
I declare the House and Committee for the consideration of the Infrastructure Bill.
Speaker.
Mr. Chairman.
Members, the House and Committee on the Infrastructure Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. This is debate on clauses 3 to 18 and schedule. The Honourable Darren Hughes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on Part 1 of the Infrastructure Bill. If I could indulge you, Mr. Chairman, just briefly to say how nice it is to see the Honourable Tau Henare in the chamber this evening in the committee. If I link it back to the bill, I know he's had some changes to his own infrastructure lately, and I know he's got 21st century equipment now in that respect, and it is quite genuinely good to see him. On this side of the House, we'll be ensuring his continued recovery by encouraging him not to interject quite as thoroughly and aggressively as he normally does. We'll be doing that out of aroha for him, not out of any sense of trying to shut him down politically. I was concerned that there were various parts of his recovery where I felt some of his Facebook status updates were getting a little too edgy politically, and I thought he should be focused on recovery, but it's great to see him here looking so well, sir. So we do want to extend that to Mr. Henare tonight. Sir, we're debating the infrastructure bill 2 years after the election of the National-led government. And this was a government that came into office saying that it was determined to lead a step change in the New Zealand economy, and saying that it was determined to, in fact, turbocharge the New Zealand economy, and infrastructure was going to be one of the ways in which it sought to do this. Mrs. Te Hiohio says that's absolutely what they tried to do. The only thing she's been able to turbocharge was the Pacific Economic Development Association Trust. She sure built up their infrastructure until things got a little bit difficult for her in that particular respect. But, sir, this bill has been languishing on the order paper. Part 1 sets up the new, when it's split through SOP later this evening, sets up the new utilities access bill, and that's the largest chunk of this bill here in Part 1. But it troubles the opposition considerably that what was meant to be a key part of the government's economic program has sat around for 2 years of this government's term with absolutely nothing happening about it. And when the Minister for Infrastructure speaks, maybe he could tell us why in a new portfolio, which was created for him after the election as part of, no doubt, some sort of power struggle with the Honourable Stephen Joyce. Mr English insisted on an extra portfolio. Fair enough. He's been burnt often enough in politics to know it's important to cover your bases. Then this portfolio was set up, and there's only been one piece of legislation that he had to introduce as a result of picking up this portfolio. This is it. And 2 years later, here we are, stuck in the committee stage on it. So we'd be very interested to hear from the Minister to what extent this bill is a priority. We're debating it on a day in which the government has backed down on what was just in February a centre point of their economic policy, mining of Schedule 4 lands and precious conservation areas of New Zealand. That was so important. It was in the annual statement to Parliament. But today, of course, that policy has been completely abandoned halfway through the year for which the statement was meant to apply. We'd like to know just how critical this is seen to be, because that backdown, it appears to me, it was a political backdown, not a backdown of principle or a change of decision or philosophy or principle by the government. I believe they still believe those areas should be mined, but they've backed away from that on the basis of their political imperatives and the political environment changing. There doesn't appear to be a lot left to hang the turbocharging of the economy on once the infrastructure bill is stuck well into the second year of the government's term. The mining proposal has been mined in the opposite direction. The cycleway, which to the Minister's great credit he always opposed. The Minister for Infrastructure always knew the cycleway was a complete joke. He knows how to recognise such things, and he never lent any support to it of anything that was meaningful. And of course, nothing in this bill is covered at all in terms of the cycleway, but that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone at all. So we do want to know, as we open up the debate on the part-by-part consideration of this bill from the Minister for Infrastructure, just how important is this to the government? What in the last 2 years since they've been dithering on this bill, turning it into a piece of legislation. What significant items of infrastructure development in New Zealand have been stopped or stymied because this legislation was not present? And if the Minister could tell us that, it would give us some sense of the urgency of this bill. Goodness knows there's been enough bouts of urgency that the House has been put into since the election, but on not one occasion was the infrastructure bill part of those motions. That's despite, I've got to say, Mr Chairman, the Labour opposition offering to facilitate that bill through its stages in urgency. We support this bill with the exception of Part 4, which my colleague, the member Moana Maki, is going to go through when we get to that stage. But for parts 1, 2 and 3, there is bipartisan support for this bill because we can see what some of the issues have been with the inefficiencies and uncertainties that have been there. So we're interested to hear from the Minister why the bill has taken so long to get to this point.
I call the Honourable Tau Hinari.